Did you know that mice like to partake of the green stuff? Well, at least that's what a group of police officers tried to claim. In 2018, the upper management of a police department near Buenos Aires, Argentina, performed an inspection of impounded drugs. Curiously, out of the approximately 6.6 tons of confiscated cannabis that had been stored in a police warehouse for the past 2 years, only 6 tons could be accounted for. When questioned by a judge, a police commissioner claimed that the mice ate over half a ton of marijuana. Forensic experts from Buenos Aires University debunked the commissioner's explanation, saying that with their excellent sense of smell, mice wouldn't mistake the drug for food. Also, if they'd eaten large quantities of cannabis, a lot of mouse corpses would have been found in the warehouse. 8 policemen ended up fired, and the commissioner was investigated by the court to determine if the missing drugs were the result of expedience or negligence. That might be a funny incident, but how common is it for confiscated drugs to go missing? What actually happens to drugs seized by police? Generally, the procedure is determined by where the bust happened. Each country, and in many cases each jurisdiction or law enforcement agency within countries, have their own set of rules, regulations, and processes for confiscating drugs. In general, in the US, during a raid, arrest, or any situation where the police seizes narcotics, they immediately start a chain of custody for their items. Law enforcement must manage contraband while it's in their possession. They have to be able to show in court that the drugs have not been swapped, altered, or tampered with prior to testing. After the narcotics are seized, the confiscating officers take them to police station's property room. The officers then package the drugs in clear plastic bags along with case information, such as the seizing officer name, ID numbers, date, time, and case number. Any information is usually written in permanent ink. Then the plastic bags are heat sealed and tamper evidence tape is put over the seal. The officers initial and date the tape, so if someone was able to get the tape off without tearing it, it would be impossible for them to put it back on in a way that lines up with the other writing on the tape. Once sealed, the drug packages are submitted to the evidence management unit, who forwards them to a crime lab or a forensics unit, either in-house or off-site. The lab tests the drugs to positively identify exactly what the substance is. The drug ID provided by testing is crucial in helping law enforcement to file charges and make cases. Minus the small amount used for testing, the crime lab or forensics will return the drugs to the evidence management unit for storage pending case disposition. Now, if the case goes to trial, the prosecutor may request that the arresting officer bring the drugs to court. In this situation, evidence management would check the drugs out of the property storage room to the officer. They would then take them to court and return them to the property room after the hearing or portion of that trial they were needed for. Once the case completes, the time for an appeal passes and the evidence is no longer needed, the drugs are reclassified in the system as slated for destruction. Most jurisdictions hold drugs for the duration of the trial. On average, for a non-serious offense, the drugs might end up being held less than 3 years. For a large bust with a long trial with many defendants, seized narcotics could be held for 7 to 8 years. Sometimes police use the drugs slated for destruction for undercover operations and training, both canine and field test training for employees who may not come into contact with drugs often, but should be familiar with narcotics, such as probation, parole officers, and confidential informants. Most jurisdictions conduct biannual evidence destructions, or when the amount of contraband slated for destruction reaches a predetermined threshold, eradication is carried out. A common exception to storing all the seized narcotics of a case is live marijuana plant seizures, especially from commercial outdoor gardens. Law enforcement will collect representative samples for court. Then they'll use a backhoe or other gardening equipment to dig a deep hole and mass bury the other cannabis plants. Deprived of oxygen, the plants will quickly rot and die. For destruction, law enforcement agencies have many agreements with local funeral homes, factories, or hospitals to incinerate the contraband. Generally, incinerators burn hot enough to quickly and rapidly destroy the drugs while not producing smoke. Other jurisdictions use third-party contractors licensed to handle hazardous materials to destroy the drugs on their behalf. Then, there are some law enforcement agencies that burn the drugs themselves. Sometimes they get in over their own heads, such as in 2015 when a police force in Tangerang, a town 15 miles outside of Jakarta, Indonesia, decided to destroy 3 tons of cannabis in a bonfire. Realizing that the fire would give off fumes, local officials wore gas masks. However, they forgot about the town. Smoke from the fire spread and a significant portion of the town's residents got high or experienced dizziness and headaches. As our opening story highlighted, there are a few law enforcement officers out there with sticky fingers. Sadly, this is not an uncommon issue. While researching this video, we found multiple instances of cops in the US, UK, and other countries being caught stealing from a property storage. In some cases, cops even skipped the evidence storage part and simply misplaced the drugs during a raid or arrest. And that's what a pair of Canadian cops did. misplaced marijuana-laced chocolate bars straight into their mouths. On January 27, 2018, Toronto constables Jamie Young and Vittorio Dominelli were part of a raid on a pot dispensary. Vittorio stole 3 hazelnut chocolate bars infused with cannabis oil. Later on that night, the two cops were on surveillance duty. After a discussion about having never tried marijuana, they decided to sample the chocolate. They ate 8 squares of 1 bar. 20 minutes later, the effects of the chocolate hit Vittorio like a ton of bricks. He started sweating heavily and thought he was going to pass out. He worried that he was going to die. About 2 hours later, Vittorio called for assistance over police radio using the 1033 police code, which indicates an officer is in serious trouble. He claimed he was about to pass out from running down the street. Responding officers said that the pair appeared to be in distress when they were found. They were both taken to a hospital. One of the responding officers slipped on ice during the call and also had to be transported to a hospital. Vittorio and Jamie faced misconduct charges under the Police Services Act. Vittorio resigned from the force. A judge called him a complete idiot for tampering with evidence. Due to Vittorio's theft, 7 of the suspects charged in the pot shop raid had their charges dropped. Sometimes the cops aren't stealing to satisfy curiosity or support a personal habit, they're running an illegal black market. In 2014, based on a tip, police in the UK conducted a raid on Police Inspector Keith Booth's home. They found cocaine, crack cocaine, heroin, ecstasy, and cannabis with an estimated street value of £700,000. They even found 24 pounds of cocaine hidden in his washing machine. Prior to his arrest, Booth was responsible for evidence storage at a West Yorkshire police station. Part of his job was to manage seized narcotics and make sure they were checked and signed off for disposal. However, instead, he and his son Ashley ran a drug recycling ring and sold drugs to a network of drug dealers. Keith was pretty sly. On the surface, he was extremely diligent. He sent emails to colleagues expressing his concerns about missing or unlabeled drug packs and also made it his responsibility to have a CCTV camera installed in the storeroom. Ultimately, Keith was found guilty in a number of charges, including theft with intent to supply. Ashley was found guilty of 5 drug conspiracy charges. While we've discussed some of the more lighthearted examples of corrupt police stealing confiscated drugs, it's a serious issue. When law enforcement and the justice system can't be trusted, it erodes public trust. Unfortunately, it's difficult to find detailed statistics surrounding police theft. Sometimes it's classified as misconduct, especially when a case against the officer isn't pursued. When the theft is for personal use, especially if the officer is part of a smaller force, perhaps in a small town, the response and consequences vary greatly. Some cops are merely given a slap on the wrist, suspended, or forced to resign, perhaps fired and given suspended sentences with probation. Notably, in the US, an all-too-common scenario is that after a work incident involving physical trauma, an officer is prescribed pain pills and becomes addicted, or they develop PTSD due to the incident. In either case, over time, the officer spins out of control and starts stealing from the property room at work. Sadly, decorated officers of many years have brought lifelong careers to an abrupt end due to their addictions. For larger law enforcement groups, such as those servicing a city, and for scenarios where stealing confiscated drugs were just one aspect of overall poor behavior from an officer, the end result was often jail time, often after an investigation or a sting from the feds. Sometimes, staff other than police are derelict in their duty of the application of law in regards to impounded drugs. In June 2011, discrepancies were found in the paperwork of Annie Dukin, a chemist at the Hinton State Laboratory Institute in Boston. This lab IDs narcotics for several counties in the state of Massachusetts. Further investigation revealed that Annie had forged the initials of an evidence officer in her logbook. Despite being suspended from lab duties, Annie was still allowed to testify in court for 8 more months until February 2012, when Boston district attorneys were notified of the breach in procedure. Annie was finally placed on administrative leave and quit soon after. A police probe uncovered that for years Annie had altered and faked test results to hide her frequent dry labbing or visually identifying samples without actually testing them. She only actually tested around 1/3 to 1/5 of the 60,000 drug samples that crossed her desk. Some co-workers had even brought concerns about Annie to their bosses, who turned a blind eye. It also came out that Annie didn't have a master's degree in chemistry from the University of Massachusetts Boston, as she had claimed on her resume and sworn in testimony. As a result of Annie's falsifications, the lab was shut down. Multiple charges, including 17 counts of obstruction of justice and 8 counts of tampering with evidence, were brought against her. Annie was sentenced to 3 to 5 years imprisonment and 2 years parole. Her only known motive for her actions was to look extremely productive and further her career. In the end, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court dropped 21,587 drug convictions that had hinged on potentially tainted samples processed by Annie. Several defendants filed civil suits, Annie's actions wreaked absolute havoc in many lives beyond court issues. Some defendants lost jobs, driver's license, or were deported. Others had marriages fall apart, lost access to kids, and paid a small fortune in lawyer and court fees. The state of Massachusetts continues to deal with the fallout from the scandal. One prominent attorney said that as many as 40,000 people could have been falsely convicted as a result of Annie's actions. Now, go check out crazy true stories from undercover cops, or watch things you should absolutely not do if you're pulled over. Whichever video you watch next, it will be far more fun than being arrested. Trust us.